for coming to this presentation early in the morning, and also thank you for inviting me to provide this seminar. So today's talk is going to be about the, 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 the effect of job displacement on individual earnings in Indonesia. And this was part of my dissertation chapter, which I am now working with my advisor to convert into a publication. So this is still a work in progress, and I would love to hear your feedback and comments on the work. And if you have any questions while I'm talking, please feel free to interrupt, because I'm used to that. And if you need any clarification, then I'm happy to provide that as we go along. So if you, so this paper is motivated by a research that's very common in developed countries that looks at the effect of job displacement on individuals' earnings. So the way to think about is that a worker rarely is employed in the same job over the course of his life. There are so the way to make progress in the labor market is basically either through promotion within your own job, or you move to a different job which pays you a higher salary, right? So over time, workers' earnings go up because they are either they are basically able to move to better paying jobs. On the other hand, there might be cases where workers are laid off from the job, which leads to the displacement involuntary. And most of this is some of this big sustained loss in earnings because of displacement of jobs. There's surprisingly less work on the similar topic done on developing countries, and I said surprising because displacement is actually a very important part of development. Right? So a developing country is undergoing rapid economic changes. So there are structural changes where the economy is moving from agriculture to manufacturing sector and the manufacturing services sector, which means that a lot of workers are actually switching jobs and moving to newer sectors. And this kind of structural changes is made more rapid by process of globalization and also because through economic integration. Right? So some other aspects of developing economy that makes this question important for this context is basically that because of the rapid structural change, there is a faster decay of sector-specific skills. So if a worker was accumulating a lot of skills in a particular sector, and that sector is now competing with a foreign firm or foreign countries, then there is a faster decay of sector-specific skills. Another feature of developing economies is that a lot of jobs tend to be low-skill jobs, and also a great fraction of the workforce is actually at the lower skill level, right? And many of the jobs have standard processes, so they tend to be repeated tasks that can be carried out with relatively low skills. Also, a lot of developing countries tend to not have social safety policies that helps the workers adjust to earnings loss due to displacement. So if a worker loses his or her job in a developing country, then there is very little support officially from the government. Although we know from the literature that there's a lot of support from other family members in the form of informal kind of help that the family members provide. The workforce in developing countries are yet to be done. So it's not the case that the structural changes are happening at the upper end of the age distribution. So it's not the case that a lot of people in the old industries that are no longer competitive are retiring, and the younger workforce is moving into newer industries. So there is less of a concern or less of attrition through retirement. There's also a high rate of informal employment, and this is something that has received a lot of attention over the past decade in terms of doing research. And the feature of the informal labor market or informal sector is that they tend to be less regulated, which means that they are not the pay is lower, so they're not subject to the minimum wage laws, and they don't reward formal skills as much, and they are rarely offered any benefits in terms of insurance or housing benefits or other benefits, and there's very little job security. So individuals do not have any protections against hiring decisions made by the firms. And in that setting, at least in a developing country setting, few workers who are formally employed, so workers who are employed in large firms that have job security would willingly move into informal employment, like self-employment, right? So because the pay or the earnings that they can make in the informal sector is much lower compared to that in the formal sector. So basically, that's why we want to study that the issue of job displacement in the case of a developing country, and I think Indonesia is a very good setting to study this topic. So let's give you a brief background on the Indonesian economy. I'm sure you know a lot. And on average, the growth rate is about 5 to 6% per year. And there has been a rapid decline in poverty rates as well. So the headcount ratio has declined from 45% in the early 90s to about 12% in 2012. So that's a rapid decline in poverty rates. At the same time, there has been an increase in the measures of inequality as well. So Gini coefficient, for example, has increased from 0.33 to 0.33 to about 0.47 2010. The real wages have remained flat, so they have not increased as fast as one would hope for an economy that is growing at this rate. And if you disaggregate the real wage growth into formal and informal sectors, there has been some increase in formal wage, real wage, and that's mostly due to the increases in minimum wage laws that have continually updated the amount of minimum wage that the workers need to pay. But in the informal sector, there hasn't been much growth in the real wage at all. So the wage growth is not kept up with inflation. There's also a high degree of vulnerability. So incomes remain clustered around the poverty line. So you might find a lot of workers just above the poverty line, but they're not very far above the poverty line, which means that they are more vulnerable to any kind of economic shocks. For example, a loss of job, a job for one loss of work. So any kind of negative shocks can easily push them back below the poverty line. So the most of the boom that Indonesia experienced over the decade of the 2000s was due to a growth in export demand for especially for things like palm oil and other minerals. And some of these labor market impacts, such as growing inequality and reduced poverty, but with the increased growth rate, could be explained by some of this experience of Indonesian economy. So in the 2000s, the share of the main resource products like palm oil, it increased from 32% to 46%. So Indonesia increasingly was specializing in this resource-led growth in the 2000s. And theoretically, we can think of two effects that this kind of resource boom has on the economy. Right? So in the booming sector, the lot of workers that are attracted from the declining sectors to the booming sectors, especially those of unskilled workers. And there's also a big growth in demand for non-traded goods like services. So that and both of these lead to the type of changes that the Indonesian economy is undergoing in this time period. So as a result of this Dutch effect of the resource boom, the manufacturing competitiveness declined, which means that they were further hurt. The manufacturing sector was further hurt by the loss of competitiveness. And a lot of the spending, a lot of the incomes that are generated through the resource boom were spent on these non-traded goods and services, which increased the demand for labor-intensive services, like things like construction and transportation and other services that grew. And a lot of these sectors whose demands are increased at this time period are usually those with services. So, and in this sector, the informal employment is the norm. So there's a lot of informal employment in the type of services that have grown in Indonesia over the past 10 to 15 years. So here's just a graph to kind of give you an idea of the change in sectoral composition of the Indonesian economy over the last 25 years. So going from 1990 to 2000. So you can see that in the beginning, the share of agriculture was low, but the share of industry in the growth rate of Indonesian economy was high, and so in the 1990s, most of the Indonesian growth was a result of growth in industries and services. So over time, the role of industries in their contribution to economic growth has declined, whereas the share of industries growth on the overall economic growth has declined over time, whereas the role of services has remained fairly steady, and service sector has become more important for the Indonesian economy over the time period. And there is some concern that the decline in manufacturing sector in Indonesia is an example of what's called a premature deindustrialization. So there is a big literature that talks about at what levels of economic growth should the country start to increasing specializing services, and if countries are moving to services at an earlier levels of economic growth, then that's a phenomenon that's termed as premature deindustrialization. So here's a graph that shows that plots the log of per capita income measured in 2005 prices on the x-axis, and we have the share of manufacturing to total GDP on the y-axis. And you can see that this follows some sort of a inverse U-shaped relationship right here. And the peak of this relationship is around 9.2 logs GDP. And if you look at where Indonesia falls, and Indonesia is basically denoted by the red dots, whereas other countries like the other dots represent Cambodia, Japan, Korea, Malaysia, Philippines, Singapore, Thailand, and Vietnam. So you can see that Indonesia's manufacturing has peaked around here and then has already started declining. Right? So the peak of Indonesian manufacturing contribution to GDP was actually happening much earlier than some of the other countries around the world that could be compared. And this means that maybe the manufacturing sector has not done enough of a job to actually pull a lot of people out forward. And partly this could be explained by the boom in the resource sector. And the question is then what is the consequence of this kind of premature deindustrialization on workers' earnings? And the reason we focus on manufacturing is because that is the sector that is most complementary to those skills. So this is a sector where even low-skilled workers without a lot of formal education or a lot of skills can actually earn a decent wage, right? Because a lot of those jobs are actually complementary to those skills. Whereas the service sector, the complementarity between those skills and so those skilled workers are not able to earn as much money because the service sector, doing well in the service sector requires you to have a lot of skills because it involves using technology, for example. So the role of manufacturing is very important in the economy that has a huge fraction of workers that have those skills. And the decline of manufacturing jobs in Indonesia can also be traced out through this graph here. So what we do in this graph is basically follow a cohort of males aged 20 to 24 in the 24, and look at what fraction of that cohort was employed in the manufacturing sector over time. Okay? So, for example, the solid line here, it represents the cohort which was aged 20 to 24 in 1985. So, we combine multiple rounds of the census data to follow that cohort. So, the cohort who was 20 to 24 in 1985 would be 25 to 29 in 1990. And so in the 1990 census, we look at what fraction of that particular age group members were employed in the manufacturing sector. So what we can see here is that the cohort that was between 20 to 24 in 1985, the share of their employment in manufacturing rose to 1990. The button started declining starting in 1995, and then has continued to decline over time. Okay. So, but if you just start the cohort at 1990, so the long dashed line, right, this line is for cohorts that were 20 to 24-year-olds in 1990. So we follow that age group males over time and look at what's happening with their share of manufacturing employment. And what we find is that so they start out at a very high manufacturing employment rate. So about 22% of the cohort that was between 20 and 24 years old in 1990 were employed in the manufacturing sector. But that share declined immediately in 1995 and has continued to decline after the financial crisis in 1997. On the other hand, the youngest cohort in 1995, the 20 to 24-year-olds, which is represented by this line, had a very high share of employment, more than 25% in 1995. But that was employment in manufacturing has also sharply declined immediately after the financial crisis. Okay? And going up to 2000 now what happens is that even the youngest cohort, which is the 24-year-olds in 2000, their share of manufacturing employment has started to drop as well. So it was not only that people who were already employed in manufacturing lost their jobs, but the young workers who were just entering the labor market, they were also not finding work in the manufacturing sector, but instead were moving to other sectors. Okay? And you see that decline of manufacturing continuing to 2005 as well. Okay? So basically this traces out, this shows two important facts. One is that the manufacturing has declined not only because newer workers aren't finding jobs in the sector, also because existing workers are moving out of the sector and moving into other sectors.
Sorry, I'm interrupting. Right, so this graph is for the young cohorts.
Yes.
Right, and you said that the reason why it's declining because those young job seekers are finding job in the manufacturing sector. Do you see the other way reason, like the other way around, that those young workers aren't good enough or they don't have that skills to be accepted to the manufacturing? Lack of skills, lack of person skills.
It could be. So part of the reason could be that, I mean, it actually means that, so these workers who are 20 to 24 in 2000, they have a higher skill levels, so they have more education, for example, and they might actually find good jobs in other sectors. So part of the reason is that the younger workforce is more skilled, and they can actually earn a lot of money in the other sectors too. So they might be choosing to move to the sector. But part of the reason could also be that they aren't finding jobs in the others. So there's a group of both, those who are better skilled and therefore are willingly going to these new sectors, like the service sector, whereas there's also the possibility that the demand for their skills is falling as well for among those who are those skills. So yeah, that's a good point. Right. Yeah. All right. So the question is, so basically what we want to see is, so for people who are basically losing this kind of formal manufacturing jobs, what's happening to the earnings once they experience the job loss, right? So the basic question that we're asking is, so what are the consequences of job displacement for formal workers in Indonesia? So when a formal worker loses his or her job, and we follow the same worker over time, and we see what do we see in terms of their earnings, and that's the question that we're trying to answer here. So just to give you a brief, a simple theory about what might be going on. So let's think about a worker who are all initially employed in job called zero. So that could be manufacturing, for example, right? And some of those workers, so in the initial period, everyone is working on this manufacturing sector, job zero, and some of them get displaced to another job in the service sector, for example. So we would call that job one. Right? So we know that each worker will have some job-specific human capital. So some workers might be good in the manufacturing sector, some workers might be good in the service sector, right? So it's likely that they won't earn the same amount of money in both sectors. So some workers who are good at job zero is going to make more money in job zero. Workers who are good at job one are going to make more money in job one. Right? So, and we know that if workers are maximizing their options, then they're going to choose the job that will give them the highest return. Right? So workers who are good at job zero is going to stay at job zero, while workers who are good at job one are going to switch to job one. Right? But it might be the case that the switch might be happening because of involuntary reasons. So decline of manufacturing sector that reduces demand for manufacturing jobs, and some of these workers who are good at job zero would be forced to move to job one, even if they didn't want to, right? And so if you look at the earnings of workers, so the earnings of worker I, who's working at job zero, is given by this equation, where it's a linear equation, where the earnings is some observed characteristics and then the returns to their specific skill. Right? And if the worker was working on job J, then we have the same thing, but with a different coefficient. So they would be making money on the job. So after displacement, if this workers get to stay in job 0, then there will be some change in earnings. Right? So they will make more money because, for example, the returns to the specific skills has increased over time, or the returns to any other factors that they possess are also increased over time. Right? But if the workers are displaced, then they will also see a change in the earnings, but the change in the earnings will be the difference between the returns of the skill in the new job minus the difference minus the return on the skill that they had in the old job. Right? So if you look at the difference between these two, so if we compare workers who were displaced to workers who stayed in job 0, then their difference in earnings could be either because of the difference in the returns to the skill in the different jobs. Right? So workers were good at manufacturing, earned some amount of money in manufacturing minus what they would earn when they were in the other sector. And part of this could be because of and part of this could be, and you take a difference with the workers who continue to stay in the same sector, but now have higher earnings because of change in the return. So think about workers who stay in manufacturing, their incomes will rise because the manufacturing incomes have risen or minimum wage have risen. So over time we will see a growth in their income. But for workers who are displaced, we'll also see a change in the income. And the question is whether the change in income for the displaced workers is larger than the change in income for the workers who are not displaced from the original jobs. Right? And if this difference is negative, then it means that the workers who were displaced from the original job were actually worse off than they were before. Right? So the question is, from policy perspective, we want to understand, well, so what can be done about this displacement effect? And in an ideal labor market, so if ideal labor market was really healthy and there were a lot of jobs being created, then we would expect this difference to be 0 over time, because even if you lose a job, you're able to find a job that pays you equally well, for example, or that suits your skill. But if the labor market, is not able to grow fast enough and develop and produce jobs that are providing a good wage for displaced workers, then we'll expect to see the big difference between workers who continue to enjoy employment in the same sector versus those who had to move out because of employment reasons. Okay? So the goal would be to basically estimate how big this difference is among workers. So we do this empirically using data from Indonesia. So what we do is we compare earnings growth, so the difference in earnings over time, for workers who continue formal employment, and we'll discuss what formal employment is in a little bit, but we take the difference between the earnings growth of workers who continue formal employment to those who switch out of formality. Okay? So we have a panel data. So the data set is from the Indonesian Family Life Survey, which is the panel data set that started in 1993, and with various rounds, the latest round is 2014. So we can track the same workers over time using this data set. So in this research, we basically start in 2000. So we take all workers who were formally employed in 2000 and look at what their earnings are in 2007. And separately, we look at all formal workers in 2007 and study what their earnings are in 2014. And we compare workers who continue to be formal employed in each time period versus workers who switch from formal to informal employment between the subsequent years. Okay? Yeah.
What's the definition of the formal?
Yeah, so we just stopped right here. So that's a good question. So what is the definition of formal employment? And in the literature, if you look at, so there is still not a there's no consensus on what kind of work should be classified as formal. So by formal, we want to imagine works that are stable, that pay well, that are subject to regulations like minimum wage law. Right? In the IFRS data, it's very hard to pinpoint exactly which jobs are formal. So what we do is we classify a worker as being formally employed if he is a private employee. So the IFRS asks whether you're self-employed, whether you're government employee, whether you're a private employee, or you're casual worker. And we define a worker as formal if he says, or he or she says, and okay, so he or she says that he was working for wage on a private firm, and the firm has to have more than 5 employees. So we think that larger firms are more likely to be formal because they are more likely to be under the formal regulations, the labor law, and therefore they are more likely to have a job security, to have benefits, or to have minimum wage. They follow minimum wage legislation. So this is the indirect way of classifying formal jobs, but we do it based on the private, based on whether they work for a private firm and if the firm is large enough. We use 5 as a cutoff. And just to clarify the sample, we only focus on males who are between 20 to 53 and the baseline year. So for the 2000 to 2007 sample, we focus on males who are between 20 to 53 years old in 2000 and track their in 2007. And in the next analysis, we focus on males who are 20 to 53 in 2007 and look at the earnings in 2014. So the reason focus on only males is to avoid issues with labor force participation decisions that are made by females, and also to avoid issues related to retirement. So older workers are likely to retire from the labor force, and since these surveys are 7 years apart, we want to avoid of losing workers because of retirement, and therefore we restrict our sample to those between 20 to 60 years old in the baseline year. Okay. So for this sample, we find that the formality rate was about 26% in 2000. So among all male workers that have been on this age group that have positive earnings, 26% report to have been formally employed. So they are employed privately in a firm that employs at least 5 people. And it has increased to about 32% in 2014 sample. And if we only, and among these 26% of workers who were formally employed in 2000, 49% of those are continued to be formally employed in 2007. Okay? And out of the and among the workers who were formally employed in 2007, 57% of those continue to be employed formally in 2014. Okay? So.
Sorry, Rashesh, just making sure. So your sample is only those who switch from job to job, like formal to informal. So you don't see like if they drop out from the labor market, for instance.
Yes. So yeah, that's a good question. So our condition is that they have to be active in both years, right? So our sample is everyone who is formally employed in the first year, and then what happened to their status in 2007, the next year. Yeah.
Still working.
Oh yeah, still working. So one of the main issue we have is attrition. So we don't see everyone. We cannot follow everyone who is formally employed in 2000 because some of them actually move and therefore we don't have information about them, and that might lead to some issues with discrimination, right? And others, some have retired, some have died due to this age. So all of those workers for whom we cannot observe their earnings are dropped out of the sample. Yeah. And that leaves us with about 1,200 workers for the 2000-2007 sample, and about 1,650 workers for the 2007-2014 sample. Okay. So let's first look at the distribution of formal workers in 2000. So where are these formal workers mostly employed? So what are the characteristics of these formal workers? So we find that if you look at the occupation of the formal workers, we find that most of these occupations in 2000, the formality was focused on these 3 categories that are associated with manufacturing jobs. Okay? So production workers, semi-skilled workers, and laborers, and including some service sector like transport workers. So these are the workers that were classified as formal, and that these three categories usually make about 50% of the formal workers sample. Okay, so there's a big operational clustering on these areas. And if you look at the sectoral distribution of formal workers, we find that the biggest number of formal workers were at the manufacturing sector. Okay? And this is surprising because those are the firms that tend to, manufacturing firms are the ones that tend to employ a lot of people. And if you work on that, then you are classified as formal by our definition. But also a lot of service sector jobs are also classified as formal. About 25% of the workers who were classified as formal came from the social service sector. Okay? And if you look at education, you see that there was a substantial fraction of lower skill work, and by skill we're measuring skill using education in this example. So if you have less than primary, so out of all formal workers, 33, less than one third had less than primary school education, whereas most formal workers had at least senior high school level education. Okay? So that's the 2000 sample. So if we look at the same distribution for 2007 sample, we find that the share of these three occupation categories has slightly declined, but not by very much. So still about 47% of formal workers come from these three occupation categories. In terms of the sector distribution, there hasn't been much change. So manufacturing still dominates in terms of employing formal jobs, and social service sector is also a very big fraction. One big change is actually the role of education in getting formal jobs. Right? So the share of formal workers that have less than primary or less amount of education has declined to 24% from 32% in the earlier sample. So in these 7 years, having more education is actually makes a big difference in terms of whether or not you are employed formal. And the share of the more high educated workers, so those who have senior levels of education or college level education, has increased substantially over the two time periods. And now we only take workers that are formal in 2000 and look at which of those workers switch to informal sector and which of the workers continue to remain formally employed, right? And what does the distribution look like? So we look at the sectoral distribution, and then we look at the school distribution. So each column, it adds up to 100. So basically this first column here shows the distribution, sectoral distribution workers who were formally employed in 2000 but now switched to informal in 2007. Okay? The second column is a distribution of workers who were formally employed in 2000 and continue to be formally employed in 2007 as well. Okay? So if we compare these two, what we see is that there are some sectoral differences. So for example, those who were employed in agriculture sector in 2000 are the ones that switched to informality at a higher rate in 2007. Okay? On the other hand, workers who were in the manufacturing sector in 2000 tend to stay formal at a higher rate. Right? So the share of manufacturing in stayers is 33% compared to only 22% of switchers. And if you look at the social services sector, you can see that about even, so those two numbers aren't that different, right? So, but we see that a slightly higher fraction of service sector workers switch out of formal workers work into informal work. Okay? And if you look at the education distribution, we already see the importance of education. So basically, if you're more educated, you're more likely to stay formally employed. Okay? Between these two time periods. So if you have more than senior high school level, you are likely to be formally employed 40% of the time, whereas the fraction in the informal the switchers is actually lower. But if you're low skill, then you're more likely to be switched to informal than to stay formal. Okay, so the importance of education is again highlighted in this table. And if you do the same thing, again, look at the same numbers for the 2007 sample and then see what they are doing in 2014. And look at the distribution among those who were switched to informal versus those who stayed formal. We see that, so two things to highlight here would be, so one, The manufacturing is still important, but the difference has fallen, right? So if you compare this manufacturing sector, the difference was about 10 percentage point between those who stayed formal and those who switched to informal. Now that difference has declined from 23% up to about 5 percentage points, which means that a manufacturing worker was equally likely or almost equally likely to either stay formal or switch to informal. So manufacturing no longer provided the kind of assurance that goods continue to stay formally employed between this time period. And also the importance of social services. Now the services sector, the fraction of workers who are employed in the social services sector are more likely to continue to be formally employed. Okay, so that shows that the services sector has now grown in importance in providing jobs that are stable, that employ a lot of people, and therefore are subject to regulations from the market. So this is that's important one to highlight. And the other one is that the importance of education has actually risen over time as well. So over this time period, so the difference is much larger. If you are primary or less educated, then the chances of switching to informal have increased by quite a bit, right? So the difference here is about 12 percentage points. And if you are senior high school educated or college educated, then your chance of staying formal is also increased by a lot. So what this shows is that there's some central story where a lot of workers that are in certain sectors are more likely to stay formal, and if you have more education, you are more likely to stay formally employed over time. Okay? So now let us look at the regression results. So what we do is basically we do a regression of earnings on the left hand side. So earnings is our dependent variable, and we have several independent variables. Our main independent variable is formality status, right? So if you recall, so our sample is everyone who is formal in the first period. So everyone who is formal in 2000, and so we have a dummy that indicates whether they are still formally employed in 2007 or they have switched to informal sector. Okay, so that this is formal dummy here. Then in some specifications we control for log earnings. So the earnings in 2000 is controlled for, and then we have constant term, and then we have several controls like age. Age dummies, we have education levels, we have occupation, and we have provincial fixed effects. Okay? And so in the first three columns, the dependent variable is hourly earnings in 2007. And in the last three columns, so instead of looking at hourly earnings in 2007 and then controlling for hourly earnings in 2000, what we do is we directly take a difference between the earnings in the two time periods. Right? So we take a difference in earnings in 2007 minus the earnings in 2000, and then use that as a dependent variable, and run a regression of that variable with a formal dummy, which indicates that you are still formally employed in 2007, and then some other control variables. Right? So what we find is that so if we look at these first three columns, we find that after controlling for some of the covariates, formally employed workers had 41% higher earnings than informally employed workers. Okay? So the difference between formal and informal employed workers was 21%. Okay? And that's the same in the case of where we took the great tech difference in the earnings over time rather than doing this in this way. We still find that after controlling for age, education, occupation, that the workers who continue to be formally employed actually have 20% or almost 20% higher earnings than workers who have to switch out of informality, okay? Or switch to informality, which means that if you manage to stay formal, controlling for education and all other characteristics, you will enjoy a 20% higher growth in your earnings than if you have to switch out of formality. So it seems that continuing to be employed in formal work is a foremost in the Indonesian labor market, right? So we do the same regression for 2007 to 2014 age samples. So what we do is, again, look at the set of male workers who were formerly employed in 2007 and regress their earnings or earnings difference on indicator variable that indicates whether they are still formerly employed in 2014. And we find that actually the difference, if we do a first three tables, the first specification we have find that the earnings premium is actually increased to about 33%. But that's slightly different from if we look at the difference specification on the last three columns. And the coefficient here is very similar to the coefficient we had earlier, which is about 20% difference in the earnings of workers. 20% higher growth of earnings for workers who continue to be formally employed after 7 years. Okay? So a few caveats. Please notice we actually don't know if workers switch the jobs. Right? So it might be the case that the firm that we're working for actually shrunk to employ less than 5 people. So we actually don't know exactly whether people switch from one job to another, or it was just that by happenstance, but it just happened to be that the firm had a shrink. And we also don't know exactly when they lost the job. So some workers might have been immediately displaced after 2008, for example, whereas some workers might have been displaced in 2013. So we don't know the timing of the displacement either. So this number as an average of workers who were displaced at various times during this time period, and some of them might have switched to a different job, others might have just been suffered from a shrinking of their business, for example. So we don't know those two. To summarize and conclude what we have talked about so far. So transition out of formality does have a big consequence for workers. And so if the workers are not able to keep the formal jobs, then they enjoy a slower growth of the earnings than if they were able to maintain their formal status. And we also find that the recession is not necessarily required for a displacement offer. In the studies that focus on developed countries, the reason some people lose their job is due to recession. So, but in a country like Indonesia, where resource boom is driving a high economic growth, we might still see displacement because of structural changes that are going on in the economy. So switching from manufacturing to service sector jobs. Okay? So what might be the causes of this engineering stop? So what might explain the slower growth of earnings for workers who have switched out of formal jobs? And we compare that to experience of advanced economy. So one explanation could be frictional or cyclical unemployment. So even the case that the economy is restructuring, but in the case of Indonesia, this was not the case because the economy was actually growing quite rapidly. So if you look at some of the research that's being done on the Indonesian economy, it is often claimed that the previous period is similar to a jobless growth because the growth rate is the growth in actual jobs is not as high as the rate of economic growth is. We might also be worried about loss of sector-specific skills. So the manufacturing workers who were good at producing goods at the factories are no longer have the same skills required to excel in the service sector, right? So they might not be, for example, they might not know how to drive, or might not be able to work in the construction sector. So this loss of skills might also be important. But the most important thing seems to be the switching from informal to formal sector, formal to informal sector. So there is a big earnings difference between the formal and informal sector. So a lot of your earnings growth does depend on whether or not you are able to maintain the formal status, and that might mean that the labor market might be segmented between those between the formal and informal sector, and it's hard for workers to actually actually enter the formal sector in order to enjoy the benefits of an informal job. So there might be some role of policy, although we don't actually specify exactly what, so things like changes in manpower law in 2003 or the minimum wage laws that might have had some role in shrinking the opportunities in the formal sector, and that might have hurt the workers. And it's not clear or whether for employment transition. So these workers might just be having a bad time temporarily and then maybe eventually go to switch to formal jobs. It might be cyclical, so it might depend on whether what state the economy is. So once the economy starts creating more jobs, these workers might be able to enjoy benefits as well. Or it might be something very intrinsic about the labor market structure, and that might so the workers who are unfirmly employed might this strain might of losing or losing out on earnings growth might continue unless policy is changed or some other features of the labor market is changed. Okay? So we do want to talk about a few issues that need to be taken into account when we are interpreting the results. So one is our definition of formality is by no means the only definition that's used. So some people only focus on whether workers are privately employed, so they don't care about what the size of the firm is. Others, and some of the work that we did earlier, we tried to look at we tried to define formality more narrowly, and we said, okay, job is formal only if it provides housing benefits or it provides training or it provides some other kind of benefits. So we need to experiment with different definitions of formality in order to see if the results are robust to different definitions. We haven't really talked about selection issues. So what we did right now is we're comparing workers who switch to workers who are staying. And we said that some of those switch might be voluntary, or some of the switch might be involuntary. So, but if the switch is voluntary, then we are basically comparing apples to oranges, because workers who switch will be different than workers who stay, right? So the comparison might not exactly valid. So we're still trying to think about how to best address the issue of comparability across the different groups of workers. And like we talked about earlier, there is an attrition issue as well, where we don't follow everyone. So some of the workers who switch out of who are no longer in the sample might be different than the workers who are. And to speak to that, there's actually some evidence of that. So if you look at which workers are in the sample and which workers are not in the sample in 2007, and look at their characteristics in 2000, so in the baseline here, to find that those who leave the sample tend to come mostly from younger group. Right? So young workers tend to basically migrate to other areas, so that we no longer have information about their job status. And also, more educated workers tend to be not in sample. So the fraction of workers who are college educated in the non-sample category is higher than the workers high categories sample. So these workers are most likely to be formally employed. So because of attrition, what we think is happening is the workers who would have been formally employed, as we observed them in the data, are missing from the sample, and that might actually underestimate the actual size of the difference. Because what we are doing is we don't observe workers that are formally employed somewhere else. Right? They move to a city or they move to a middle job. And then we're also thinking about some extensions, thinking about the role of education and what are the effects. So what are the effects of education on helping workers maintain their formal status, and whether or not the kind of informal jobs that workers are doing, can policy do something about upgrading the skills of the workers, especially the low-skilled workers, so that they can work in the service sector more fruitfully and improve their earnings potential. And we also we're thinking about looking at heterogeneity across different earnings. So a low-earning workers who are earning low income, are they worse off because of switching out of formality, or are the workers 2000, are they worse off by moving our format? So we're thinking about doing a few heterogeneous effect, so testing for some heterogeneous effect as well. So, but yeah, so yes, I talked about that. So that's pretty much it for today, and I'm happy to take any questions that you might have. Thank you. Thank you.
Alright, can we give a round of applause for Dr. Rashesh? Thank you, Dr. Rashesh, for your presentation. It was very interesting and insightful, especially for myself as a labor economist. I do really learn a lot from his presentation because I haven't really touched about Indonesian case in a long time. So I guess it's the moment that we've been waiting for anyone who wants to raise questions, queries. We welcome. Ibu Ruli?
Hello. Hi, Rashesh. My name is Julie. I'm from Democratic Institute. I have just two comments, which mainly clarification. So you said before about you don't know the timing of the when the respondents are dropping out from the foreign sector. I was wondering whether you have seen the work history section in the IFRS because they provide the retrospective annual work information for the respondents. So probably you can have an approximation of when they're dropping out. And the second thing, when so I just want to know, so this your sample is only for the panel respondents from 2000 or okay? Do you think there is an age effect for their dropping out? Because as manufacturing workers grow older, they tend to drop out because there is manufacturing sectors are in favor of young workers. So there is a sort of age discrimination over there. And I think this is true for female workers because of their family status. But what do you think whether the age discrimination is actually exists in the formal or manufacturing sector? That's all.
Thank you for your comments and questions. Yeah, so about the work history, so yeah, I am aware of that, but it's difficult to actually figure out if the worker is formally employed in the, for example, 2003, because they only ask about their job status, but they don't ask about the size of the firm they were working for. So given our definition requires both information, the work history section doesn't actually have all the information that's required to see exactly when the worker switched out of format. We can so if we use different definitions, then maybe the work history will be a useful way of looking at when exactly the worker switched out. So that's a very good suggestion. In terms of the discrimination, I'm not really aware of the Indonesian practices, like the actual practices of workers. So you're right that the manufacturing sector does tend to prefer younger workers to older workers. So part of the reason could be that they are no longer employed. So as the workers go older, they are laid off and they have to switch to a different sector. But part of this could be, and we saw that, but the younger workers as well now are now looking at lower demands for the sector. So I think a bigger story is the decline of the manufacturing sector itself than any kind of discrimination. I mean, I'm sure there is a discrimination, but it's probably a smaller kind of reason than the decline in the manufacturing overall.
Thank you for your presentation. My name is Tomo Karan from Democratic Democracy. My question is very simple actually. Did you also look at what type of jobs and also subsectors inside the manufacturing industry so that we have a better idea what kind of people actually get displaced and so on? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Unfortunately, the IFL is a very small sample, so it's very hard to further disaggregate the sectors into smaller categories because the sample becomes very small and it's very hard to say anything meaningful about them. So if you had a bigger sample, I think that would be a good way to kind of look at which specific manufacturing industries are the ones that are basically leading to more informal employment. But given the data set is small, we're not able to do that in this case.
Not even using descriptive statistics? I understand.
Yeah. I guess we could. We haven't tried, so we focus on the broader categories of like 9 sectors. So we haven't actually further disaggregated, but yeah, so we could try to do that and see because there is information available on the IFLS. It's just we think it's the sample becomes too small, too much about it in regression. But yeah, like you said, we could look at the descriptive statistics and see if like some specific sectors of manufacturing are the ones that are shedding more workers. Thank you.
Anyone else?
How did you do the samples? I mean, the method that you're using. Are you doing it like online or how do you do it?
Sorry.
How do you like following this? Sorry.
Following the samples?
No. So this is the secondary data. So we did collect our data. So it's the Indonesian Family Life Survey panel data set that RAND and others have collected, and it's publicly available. So we did collect the data with us. So they do their own data collection and they follow the. So they have So they started out with about 7,000 households in 1993, and they have tried to follow those households in 2007, 2007, and that's the data set they use. Thank you.
Anyone else? Can I ask questions again? Right. Oh, okay.
No, I just want to tell them. Sorry, I just want to tell them. Since some of these are students and they might not be comfortable asking in English, perhaps we can.
Oh ya, boleh pakai bahasa Indonesia nanti biar saya bantu. Boleh nggak apa-apa?
Ya, jelas.
Ada yang mau nanya pakai bahasa Indonesia nggak apa-apa? Ibu ini mau nanya mungkin. Right, oke. Mungkin sambil mikir saya boleh sedikit bertanya, nanti kalau ada di follow up. So while we're waiting for the audience to ask questions, I do still have. Well, I got 2 questions actually, but let me try first because I'm not really well familiar with the IMLS data. So I was just wondering if you could actually separate it between part-time and full-time workers within that formal sector, because I'm thinking that if they're only a part-time, they will be more vulnerable to be dislocated or to be fired later on. While the full-time, they might be finding like contract either short-term or long-term. So if you look at within the time span 2007 and 2014, they might still be working simply because they're still funded by a contract, but those who are, just I don't know what to call it, but in Indonesia we call it a part-time worker. So do you see if that could play a role in this case or in the model?
Yeah, so the issue is definitely there. So what the manpower law in 2003 did is basically made it harder for businesses to fire workers who are full-time workers. Right? So a lot of businesses switch to contracting out their workers so that they are not subject to the manpower law. We do have information on the hours worked, and we actually use earnings per hour as our measure of earnings. So it's hourly wage. And it'd be interesting to look at the differences, the rate of displacement for part-time workers versus full-time. So we haven't done it, but that's a very good suggestion. And I think you're right that the most of the workers who switch to informality might have be might be disproportionately higher from the workers who are working part-time, right? So that's definitely true.
Ada yang mau bertanya? Sebentar ya Pak. Saya delivery dulu.
My name is Hadi. I'm interested in issue on the industrialization. In the previous slide that the proportion of industry to GDP is decline. Okay, premature decline. Yes, that Indonesia is to premature to decline compared to other countries. Can you explain why Indonesia experienced this decline? And yeah, there is although the data show that the role of manufacturing is declined, some government officials deny that there is a decline. They said that the number of industry is still growing. But from the economic census, we saw that most of the industry in Indonesia is small and medium industry. About 99% small and medium industry, only 1% that's bigger industry. So, yes. What is the factor that our manufacturing is declined? And can you recommend the government what the government should do to increase the manufacturing in Indonesia?
Thank you for the questions. Yeah, so I think the main reason for premature deglobalization for Indonesia is probably the trade competition from bigger like China and other competition more competitive countries that have basically taken over like some of the manufacturing sectors that Indonesia was strong at. So like textiles, for example, is one of the sectors that has become less competitive related to other countries that are coming up faster. And another reason is the resource boom as well, because of the big increases in the share of resource exports to total exports that has also made the manufacturing sector less competitive related to other countries. And I think those are the two main reasons why we see a big increase in the service sector and also a decline of manufacturing. But I mean, the statement that I mentioned about politicians saying that the manufacturing sector is still growing, that looks to be right, but the thing is that the share of manufacturing in total GDP is the one that's declining, right? So it's not growing as fast as other sectors of the economy. So the services sector now contributes much more, higher share of GDP to than the manufacturing sector. So it could be that the manufacturing is growing, but it's growing very slowly related to other sectors, right? In terms of policy recommendations, I'm not really an expert on that, so I'm always the wrong person to ask. So I mean, making labor market policies more flexible, so that the employers are encouraged to hire workers might be something to think about. I know that one of the reasons that's given for decline in manufacturing is the stricter labor laws that were implemented after the democratization and the reform movement. So investing more in infrastructure might also help make the manufacturing sector more competitive by reducing trade costs, for example, and also yeah, I guess yeah, but again, I'm not really, I don't look closely in the manufacturing sector itself. So my focus is on the labor market, so the worker side. I'm not really an expert on the actual industry and policy side. So again, but from general knowledge, that would be the two things that comes to my mind. But I'm sure I'm missing a lot of other things as well.
What do you mean with the flexible labor market? Is it the policy that the government allow to outsourcing? Is it one of the flexible market?
Outsourcing to other countries or contracting, yes.
Yes.
I mean, but that's, yeah, it's not, so I don't know exactly what the contracting laws are, but I know that a lot of businesses, I guess, switch to or use contracting to escape the other laws, like the severance pay and other things, right? So, yeah, so I'm not sure what the laws are right now, so I don't think I can comment on that.
Yeah, because outsourcing issue is now is increasing among the workers because usually workers only work for 1 or 2 years. So maybe one of the factors why workers are displaced to other sector, like informal sector, maybe because of this law. Because if the contract is finished, they have to stop working in the manufacturer, and they cannot find the work in manufacturer, so they work in informal sector.
Yeah, no, you're right. So that might be one of that contracting is, and that kind of goes back to the issue of job security that's associated with informal work, right? So if you don't have the job security, and then you're not able to make to increase your earnings as much, and you're more vulnerable to any kind of shocks that might happen because of changes in the structure of the economy or because of recession or some other reason. So that could be one. We haven't. So I think the IFRS data does have information on whether you're a contract worker or you are you're paid hourly or you're paid by contract. So we could definitely look more into that and see if those workers are the ones that are most vulnerable to switching out of formal sector. Thank you.
Terima kasih. Berikutnya, yang ingin bertanya, persilakan. Mungkin satu pertanyaan lagi mungkin. Silakan.
Thank you. Could you please elaborate the background in defining the formality? Because I'm interested in why it must be infirm and why it must be 5 employees. Because if we see the current condition, like the startup companies or micro enterprises in Indonesia, it only needs 2 or 3 people to run the company. And how do you define if whether the respondent is working for the firm that that have 5 or more employees? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. It's a very important point because, like you said, so there might be some firms that are formal in the sense that they are registered and they are under the laws, the labor laws, but they might be employing less than 5 people, right? But by our definition, we classify them as informal. So that is definitely an issue, and like I mentioned earlier, so we have to experiment with different definitions to see whether our results are sensitive to what definition we use. But again, like having said that, it's very hard to come up with a definition that satisfies all criteria. So that perfectly kind of captures every formal form and every informal form. So we have to decide something. So this is the one we decided to do based on the literature as well, because a lot of work that looks at formality issue uses this definition of more than 5 workers and private sector as the definition of formality. So we just follow the literature as it stands right now. And so that was so that's why we use the definition that we have. And so I forgot the second question. What was the second question? Sorry.
How do you know whether the respondent?
Yeah, so the question, the survey asks the respondent to tell them how many workers are there in the firm. So it's all self-reported by the worker themselves. Thank you.
One more thing.
Yeah.
Kompas, the newspaper here in Indonesia, several days ago, report that in several years the artificial intelligence will replace some jobs we do now. What do you think about that, and what impact for a developing country like Indonesia in the future?
Yeah, that's a very good question, and I don't think I have an answer to that. But I mean, it's the issue for all countries, not even only developing countries, because even in countries like the United States and other OECD countries, the technology is replacing a lot of jobs that were previously being done by workers, and that's something I don't think we can avoid that at all. So, from a perspective of labor policy, it is important for the government to, I guess, find ways to help the workers who are displaced, either by giving them the appropriate training for the new sectors of the economy. But again, I don't think we can do anything to change the progress of technology. So it's going to happen eventually. So the best thing we can do is to be able to help workers through education or training to work with these new technologies and maybe create new jobs that combine the worker and the new technologies that may arrive. So I think the new technology will create disruption and then change the sector and destroy a lot of jobs. But I think it also creates a lot of new opportunities, and the key would be to basically find the best way to exploit these new opportunities to help workers to earn income and through their labor.
Baik, ada lagi kalau misalnya pertanyaan singkat? Ibu Lydia mau bertanya? Iya mau. Mau nanya? One more. Right. I think it's the last one, okay?
It's just a simple question. Why did you not take into account like rural, urban, or the region of the employee? Because I think that's pretty much influenced the formality and informality.
Yeah, I think I don't remember if we control for the urban rural divide. We do control for provinces. So we have like provinces like Java and others who are more urban, and then other outlying provinces. So we account for that somehow, but yeah, I think you're right. So urban workers are more likely to be formal, and rural workers are more likely to be informal. But what we're doing is we are already accounting for that partially by focusing only on formal workers. So in the baseline year, in the first year, everybody is formally employed, and what we're checking what they're doing in the next year, right? For example, so all formal workers in 2000. Whether then we see some of those workers will continue to be formally employed and others will not be formally employed. So by only looking at formal workers in the baseline year, we're sort of taking into account. So we are mostly looking at workers who are in urban areas, but maybe you're right that the workers in the rural areas who are formal are likely to be moved to informal at a higher rate, and that will be something interesting to look at.
Oke, ada lagi? Sudah jawab semua? Okay, so thank you very much for your presentation and for everyone's participation in our discussion. So I guess we come to the end of today's seminar. Once again, we would like very much thank you for Dr. Rashesh for his time giving presentation about this working paper. So it's a working paper. I think we're really looking forward to reading the published version. And thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for coming to our event today. And just to remind you, buat sertifikat dari